Good morning and welcome to day one of the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV, and I'll be with you throughout this two-day event. The theme for our first day is the Research Innovation Standards ecosystem, the opportunities, enablers and challenges as we move beyond 5G. With 5G deployments well underway, there is still incredibly innovative research happening in industry and academia, all destined to move 5G networks to the next level or beyond 5G, as well as many disruptive technologies and even disruptive use cases emerging that shape the initial thoughts on what 6G needs to be. We have expert speakers from the most significant policy, research, industry and standards groups presenting the state of play and their plans for the near future. Europe has ambitions to become a leader in 6G, and in order to make this happen, a new approach needs to be taken. So throughout today, we will examine what needs to be done and who will be doing it, both through individual efforts and the all-important collective collaborative initiatives. We end the day with an industry panel to discuss the research, innovation and standards ecosystem in ETSI, and this will be followed by our first live Q&A session, your chance to put your questions to our panelists. Now, there's a form to use here on the website and you can submit your questions anytime this morning. The live session will start at 11:15 UK time, 12:15 CET, immediately after the panel. Stay with us for our first session of the event, a welcome message from Luis Jorge Romero, Director General of ETSI, and that will be followed by a presentation from Piers O'Donoghue, Director of the Future Networks Directorate, DG Connect at the European Commission. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the very first session of the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from France is Luis Jorge Romero, Director General of ETSI. Luis has over 30 years of experience in the telecoms sectors and has overseen the rapid development of ETSI's industry specification groups, accelerating market penetration of new technologies. Welcome, Luis. Thanks for joining us. And indeed, thank you for hosting this event. Please tell us more about the work ETSI is doing on research and innovation.
Thank you very much, Guy, for this introduction. And indeed, thank you very much to TelecomTV for helping us in putting together this, I think, very good event, virtual event, unfortunately, on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. And I say, unfortunately, because I would have liked to have everybody around in ETSI in our premises. But on the other side, let's take this opportunity to extend and broaden the footprint of the event and be able to access to many more people, because I think it's going to be a very, very important session today. This event is intended to be the very first of several, because we believe research and innovation is very, very important to the work of standardization. Hence, I believe this will be just the first step to many others that will help answer main questions that research and community may have, so that we are building bridges and having more cooperation between standardizers, researchers. As you know, ETSI has been around for quite a while. We have been very much engaged into standardization in the last more than 30 years. And we have always had a very good relationship and very good connections to the research and innovation communities. Now, being at the forefront of standards development of innovative technologies, in order to serve members, we need very much to be lining hand in hand, very much aligned to what the research and innovation community is bringing. And we need to facilitate the ways in which research and innovation get closer to standards, and standards get closer to research and innovation. I've been mentioning it. I think research and innovation are very much the lifeblood of our work, and it's essential to ensure that ETSI remains at the heart of ICT standards. It's essential to be able to ensure that ETSI keeps on delivering to the needs and requests of our members. So it's very much in our interest that we could and can keep on having a very close collaboration with the research community, so that we can ensure that technology is fed into standards and finally implemented in commercially available equipment, so that those can also be deployed globally. I think it's in the interest of the research and innovation communities and in our interest that what we develop and what we work on ends up hitting the marketplace. In our membership, which is quite extensive, we have more than 900 members, and it's good to note that out of these more than 900, more than 120 are directly involved in research and innovation. And this includes universities and research centers. So it's not just huge commercial companies that have these links, but also universities and research centers that are already cooperating with ETSI in the development of standards. In order to further improve and further enhance this relationship that we have with the research and development community, we have started a number of initiatives that are meant to help our relationship with that community. On one side, we have developed a research help desk with the aim of advising researchers and innovators that want to get involved in ETSI's activities. We know sometimes this is not straightforward. This needs a little bit of hand-taking. We are very ready to do that and to help these communities get really engaged in our work. We have very recently published a web page in our site, and we have developed a brochure to explain a little bit how ETSI is linked to R&D. And what's I think most relevant and most important, we have dedicated our October issue of our Enjoy magazine to research and innovation. If you have not had the time to go through the pages of this magazine, I recommend you do. I recommend you download it from our webpage and have a real look at all that this magazine contains. And by the way, now I could encourage you as well to try and subscribe so that you get the magazine in your email. We have also developed an 8-point plan that includes specific steps to be followed by researchers that want to engage in our work. We have developed education about standards material. So what is standardization about? How we deal with the different phases in standardization, which is not just the technical or the drafting of standard documents, but also how we engage to the whole ecosystem. And there is a specific chapter which is dedicated to research, innovation, and standards. We have tried also to cooperate with several institutions around research, and I think it's worth highlighting our cooperation with Networld 2020 on their strategic research agenda, and our contribution is important there. Also with some of the associations that are dedicated to 5G in different aspects, and particularly interest has our cooperation with 5G IA, Infrastructure Association, on their work on research and standards roadmaps. And also not to forget our very strong relationship with the European Commission, particularly DG Connect and Research, to identify how we can get even more involved in research projects of the European Union. As I said, we are very open for discussion and interactions with researchers and innovators, and we welcome and we would like you to come and see us. We are ready to hear ideas. We are ready to help you drive work for standardization and see how we can help develop these ideas in order to be able to address the marketplace. This workshop, as you see, is split in 2 days. We will be able to hear from institutions and associations that have very close links to research and to us, to ETSI. We will hear speakers that come from the most significant actors involved in the ICT research, in innovation, and the standards ecosystem. We will try to examine the evolution of research and standards as we move from 5G deployments, and we need to address now new technologies and use cases that will be probably start to be used in the 6G era. Throughout the sessions, the key is trying to see ways of further fostering ETSI's engagement with the research community and also facilitate the research community contribution to standardization. This one is meant to be a very, very interactive session. So please take this opportunity to engage in the sessions, to ask the speakers, and to have a very fruitful debate. I'm sure this event will be very joyful. So thank you very much, and I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lewis. And as you said, there is an incredible lineup of speakers for this event and so much interest in this area. Hope to speak to you again very soon. We have 2 days of content still to come, as Lewis said, including presentations, panel discussions, and interviews. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, we will be taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day. And you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for it to begin. Stay with us then for our next session, which is a presentation from Piers O'Donoghue of DG Connect, who will be outlining the European policies that are driving the R&I agenda. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Brussels is Piers O'Donoghue, Director, Future Networks Directorate, DG Connect at the European Commission. Piers looks after policy development and research as regards 5G networks, IoT, cloud and data flows, service platforms, and next generation internet. Welcome, Piers. Thanks for joining us. I shall hand over to you for your presentation on the European policies that are driving the R&I agenda.
Thank you, Guy, and good morning. It's great to be able to speak to you this morning. I want to start just by setting a couple of major political milestones that set the frame for this very important subject, because already when she was taking up office, our President von der Leyen, she signaled that in her political guidelines, Europe must lead the transition to a healthy planet and to a new digital world. So digital technologies and their implementation are very high on this Commission's agenda, as they offer great opportunities for Europe's economy and our society, of course, including, by the way, to achieve our climate goals. And even so now in the situation with COVID, we've seen that digital technologies and high-speed networks have played a crucial role in keeping whole parts of the economy and the society going. The second landmark was the recovery strategy to deal with that COVID crisis that the Commission presented at the end of May, which has investments, research, and deployment in digital technologies as central to its unprecedented budgetary proposal to get Europe moving again after the COVID crisis. That's what we're calling the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and that focuses a lot on digital. Because the third landmark was the State of the Union speech by President von der Leyen on the 16th of September. She proposed that 20% of that recovery and resilience facility be invested in the digital infrastructure and in the digital transition. Now, that target was confirmed subsequently by the heads of government when they met in early October. And as such, that new fund offers an unprecedented opportunity to build a more digital Europe. The 20% target, which corresponds to about 134 billion euros in the life cycle of this new fund, that's only a fraction of the investment that has been identified as needed for Europe. Several member states are already identifying investments in digital as a top priority for their future recovery and resilience plans, and we want to see that duplicated across the European Union. Because we have identified common European challenges and opportunities under that fund to be centered on digital and climate change. And we're encouraging member states to include reforms and investments in such flagships in their plans. Now, one of those flagships is, of course, dedicated to connectivity, notably 5G, as well as to fibre coverage. Because investments in 5G, as part of these plans, they need to address the shift beyond consumer services towards infrastructure and service solutions for industry, for the whole economy, verticals as we call them, which together make up the backbone of Europe's economy. This will set a way forward for investments in a pan-European set of networks and services. They will have a strong single market approach, an all-Europe approach. And of course, they will be aligned with our increased security needs, such as you saw in the 5G cyber toolbox. So with those big political objectives in mind, if we look at European research innovation, it's very important to be realistic. We can't just wave a financial magic wand for all of our goals to be achieved. We need to research, we need to develop the technologies, and of course, we need to ensure that the results of that research and innovation can be rapidly implemented, and that can only happen through standardization. Otherwise, we will have a cacophony, we will have fragmentation, and we will not achieve our objectives. And with regard to research and innovation, connectivity is a domain where we in Europe already have proven expertise. As we showed in 5G research since 2011, in fact. That was when the Commission launched what was then a pioneering research and innovation set of actions in 5G. That was followed by the 5G public-private partnership, which was the largest research and innovation initiative in the world in 2013. And that was followed subsequently by the Alliance of IoT Innovation, the AIoTI, in 2015, which also covered the domain of the Internet of Things, which is essential to modern communications networks. Now, my boss, Commissioner Breton, he has stressed several times that European industry is well positioned in 5G. We hold about 50% of global market share, as well as about 50% of the intellectual property rights that are held by major suppliers. Now, it is the Commission's objective that Europe maintains and builds on this global leadership. We've already initiated in 2018 pioneering 6G research and innovation under the Horizon 2020 program. And now, as we look forward, we're working on the implementation of the 6G partnership with industry and the member states under what will be called, as you know, the forthcoming Horizon Europe program. Now, this new partnership on smart networks and services, which will lead us to 6G, will strengthen cooperation and involvement of member states, as well, of course, as European industry, who have been at the backbone of our efforts so far, and the Commission, using a new management structure, which is called a joint undertaking. Because here there is an opportunity to raise EU leadership across the whole 5G and 6G value chain, including in things like chips and semiconductors. And indeed, that's the objective. It's to cover the whole supply chain with a view to rebuilding EU capabilities in certain domains like devices and distributed computing, in addition to the areas such as connectivity, where there is already EU leadership. That is a very important strategic challenge. So we envisage also the participation of these vertical industries that I referred to earlier, with strong IoT and cloud components to build on and leverage EU's industrial capabilities. To achieve our objectives, however, we can't do it on our own. So this is where the Commission has been raising the idea recently of open strategic autonomy, because our efforts to promote and fund innovation and investments, they have to extend to the security issues, notably, as you saw in the context of 5G. We're making participation in EU funding programs contingent on compliance with security requirements, as you would expect. And also, given the strategic importance of this sector, the European headquartered players are also an important element in this story. Any concrete investment by non-European actors is very likely to fall under the investment screening tools and the provisions that exist at both national and at EU level, because those types of investments in what are strategically important sectors need to be assessed in relation to security and public order interests of the member states and of the European Union. If we combine those instruments, this will contribute to Europe's efforts to reinforce our industrial capabilities and to secure Europe's open strategic autonomy with a strong industrial presence in this field. This is to position us on the global stage and is an answer to the rather aggressive policies that are being followed recently, both by the United States and to China. We make no secret of that. We want Europe to become autonomous across key areas of the whole digital supply chain, while protecting and ensuring that those networks operate according to European values. But we have to be very clear. Protectionism is not an option. It is not something that we can actually work with. We are supporters of open and fair trade by seeking alliances with like-minded global partners. We have to strengthen the single market, and we have to adapt it to the digital age by having stronger industrial and technological presence in a whole set of strategic sectors, such as artificial intelligence, but also cybersecurity itself, supercomputing, and cloud and edge computing. We also have to strengthen our own resilience and our ability to develop more and better connectivity, particularly by continuing our efforts to roll out 5G quickly. And this is why we have been counting on member states' support to extend our leadership in 5G, but also to extend that into 6G in the whole value chain, as I've said. And we need to ensure that at each level of the next generation communications technologies, that the ecosystems that we see in the industrial space will actually lead developments and demand for these new communications technologies. So the situation will be radically different from today, and it is why Europe has not been as quick to trumpet successes in new speeds for consumer video, etc., which is not what 5G is about, and certainly not what 6G will be about. There will be opportunities for research in 5G and 6G, including in microelectronics, and we would see further industrial strategic alliances of European companies needing to work together with the support of member states and European Union funding in order to actually take this strategic lead. So, we have to focus on European strategic projects. That's clear. We have to build capacity. We have to build the digital infrastructures. And of course, we have to see that there are solutions, not just for business, but also for the public sector. And that really brings us then to ensuring that we go from research to large-scale deployment and to support the digitalization of the whole economy. Which brings us back to standardization, which is essential in this process that I've described. Now, Europe's leading role in research and innovation means that European entities have a significant share of intellectual property in the fields that I've been talking about. For example, several hundreds of contributions to 3GPP standards on 5G come from the results of European research projects carried out under the 5G PPP. So from a European perspective, it's important that we maintain a strong global presence while also enlarging our activities to new stakeholders, such as the vertical industries that I've referred to. So with that, with an appropriate technological development base, global market access, then we may be able to realize our ambitions of getting to market leader status. So for us in Europe, standardization at global level is important and directly linked to European leadership. Of course, also the research that is done needs to be rewarded. We believe that the European companies who invest massively in research and innovation should be properly remunerated for their efforts. So as well as that, we need an inclusive standardization process. That's a prerequisite for a global approach to standards. While coping with certain divergences between markets, between regions, nevertheless, it is a key. To seize the strategic opportunities, the standardization agenda needs to address important use cases, i.e. be inclusive, beyond simple things like higher capacity or data rates. Another prerequisite is open standards. These are crucial for the development of the digital economy. Now, our strategy on standardization aims at maintaining technological leadership and strategic autonomy, as I've said, but we need to do so in order to avoid the risk of becoming reliant and dependent on important technologies and innovation. And that is why open standards are so important, so that we can actually develop and adapt technologies to European needs and to European standards. That's something that is uppermost in our thinking as we seek to address the standardization policy issues. Similarly, global standards are key to support the ambitious use cases that we have, including, for example, in 5G. So for the first time in history, the prospects of one single 5G global standard is real. And that's very important given the process of the 3GPP in defining a global standard, and something that we want to repeat. So just to say it again, we need inclusive standardization, open standards, and global standards. And going back to the start, President von der Leyen, she acknowledged the importance of standardization in her political guidelines. So as well as speaking about climate and digital, she signaled that as we already stand in telecoms, we need elsewhere, and I quote, to replicate this success and develop joint standards for our 5G networks. She also highlighted Europe's ambition to achieve technological sovereignty in critical areas like blockchain, high-performance computing, quantum computing, and so on, and to allow data sharing and data usage. She said, we will jointly define standards for this new generation of technologies that will become the global norm. So that's what we have to do with you, working together, to really implement and make real this strategic autonomy, and doing it through standardization with the member states and all concerned stakeholders, including academia, of course, and last but by definitely no means least, the European standardization organizations. These European standardization organizations should also reflect on the issue and see how they can best serve the objectives of Europe's strategic policies. They can do so by ensuring the active and determinant role of key European partners, which should also be reflected in their membership and particularly in their decision-making process. The fact that a small number of non-European companies are able to pay for a huge number of members of staff attending all sorts of standardization meetings should not, by their preponderance, lead to their ability to actually control the ultimate standards that result. So now I've given you a lot of issues to think about, but they're challenges that we all face, and challenges where the Commission needs the input and the support of so many different actors. And that's why I'm really looking forward to the discussion at this conference, and I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address you. Thank you.
Thank you, Piers. And hopefully we'll talk more about standardization and the digital connected ecosystem during our panel discussion later today. Now, we have 2 days of content still to come, including presentations, panel discussions, and interviews. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it's all going to be available to watch later on demand. Plus, we're taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day. And you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for the session to begin. Please stay with us for our next session, which is an interview with Balázs Betenyi, 3GPP TSG RAN Chairman, who will be talking about innovation in 5G standardization. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Hungary is Balázs Betenyi, 3GPP TSG RAN Chairman. Now, Balázs was elected as Chairman of 3GPP RAN in March 2017 and has successfully led 3GPP to the creation of the first phase of global 5G standards in 2018 and in shaping the further evolution of 5G towards its holistic vision. Welcome, Balázs. Very good to see you again.
Thank you very much for having me. Good to see you, Guy.
What is the current situation with regards to RAN standards work? In terms of the release schedule, where are we right now?
That is an excellent question. I think all of our lives have been upended by the pandemic, and 3GPP is no different. So we had some very nice plans going into the end of release 16 and start of release 17. But eventually, some of the time plans and some of the plans we had to be rethought. But let me go and give this a little bit of a context. So if we think about 5G standardization as a whole and where we are today, we have to go back first to release 15, which was then, of course, the first release in 3GPP that brought 5G with it. And that was very much focusing on mobile broadband and very much focusing on filling the need that came from a shortage of mobile broadband capacity in some of the countries, in particular in Japan and the US. And the 5G deployments you see out there today are very much based on Release 15 standards. Now, from there on, Release 16 was the next step, and the main goal with Release 16 was to fulfill all the ITU requirements, all the IMT 2020 requirements, and we did that. So that was very much a successful endeavor. And we were just about able to finish Release 16, as I will show you in a separate slide, before the pandemic hit. Now going forward, with Release 17 and Release 18, we are now very much focusing on expanding the 5G platform way beyond mobile broadband. In fact, from Release 17 onwards, I would venture to say that the majority of the work we do and we undertake are coming from requirements and sectors and segments beyond the traditional cellular ecosystem. So let me go to the detailed Release 16 and Release 17 schedule. And here exactly is where you can see the impacts of the pandemic. And getting back to your original question, so with Release 16, we were just about able to finish all the standards work and all the work that was needed for the 3GPP submission to ITU and IMT 2020. And we finished that back in June. There are still some corrections and change requests coming to Release 16. But all in all, I would have to say Release 16 was very much a success story in terms of being able to finish a large number of features and functionalities well in time. Now, if we look at Release 17, this is where the mainstream of the global crisis hit, and that didn't spare 3GPP, of course. So what we have done is basically in 2 steps try to analyze and understand the detailed impacts of having to go virtual in 3GPP and what that means for the timeline. So eventually what we have come to is all in all a 9-month delay. So you can see here in the figure that for all steps of finishing a release from physical layer to the stage 3 freeze, to the ASM1 protocol freeze, each and every one of these steps would be delayed by 9 months. But one thing we need to remember is what the pandemic has shown us is the cellular ecosystem, the cellular networks, and the role of mobile networks in our society is larger than ever. And that's something the pandemic has shown. And we're trying to, as a standards organization, we're trying to live up to the challenge of delivering functionalities and features even quicker than before to live up to this challenge. I just wanted to show you two pictures here just to give you visuals. So this is how a 3GPP meeting looks like in normal times. So we have several hundred people in the same room, a lot of people discussing offline during the sessions. Essentially, it's a 12 to 16 working day, 16-hour working day with everybody at the same location and lots of discussions going on at the same time. It's a very effective way of coming to agreements, decisions, compromises. But now, of course, this has changed. So just like everybody else, just like this event here now with you, we had to go virtual. But even though 3GPP has gone virtual, 3GPP is still going strong. So we're very much making progress on all the items we have on our plate. We didn't have to cut our content. We're trying to still deliver all the different functionalities and features that we decided we would do back in last December. The means are just a little different. You can see here on this picture, it's email, it's conference calls, it's video calls, it's all kinds of sharing and collaborative tools. But again, the main point is 3GPP is still going and still going strong.
So even allowing for the delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, 5G specifications have seen a much more rapid development timeframe than previous generations, which is testament to the 3GPP processes. But how is this possible? And probably even more importantly, is this sustainable moving forward?
So that is an excellent observation. Indeed, 5G development, not only on the standards front, but starting with innovation and research, and then the standards work we do in 3GPP, but also in deployment, has seen a much more rapid development than any generation we've seen before. So as a testament, I just wanted to show this slide here. So this is a very simplistic comparison of 4G and 5G, 1.5 years after the initial availability of the first batch of standards. So back with 4G and LTE in 2008, 2009, 1.5 years after the availability of the standards, we only had a handful of networks running 4G, and we only had a handful of equipment manufacturers manufacturing handheld devices and smartphones. Now compare that to 5G, and this is what you can see here on this map. And this map is pretty recent, but is already outdated. There are much more networks now live than what you see here on this picture. But essentially, we have 60, 70, almost 80 networks now running 5G worldwide, and almost as many different equipment manufacturers manufacturing smartphones and other devices. So you can see the major shift in the speed whereby deployments are coming to the field with 5G compared to previous generations.
What are the key ingredients of 5G standards development moving forward, and how will these map onto future 3GPP releases?
So going forward, the key focus that we have, not only in standards, but in terms of innovation, research, that also then translates into eventual standards work and then onto the field with deployments, is the fulfillment of the holistic 5G vision. And the 5G vision spans way beyond mobile broadband. So 5G is not just a turbocharged 4G, it's not just LTE on steroids, it's a whole lot more. So with 5G, we really are trying to go after a lot of different industry segments, to have those segments utilize 5G in a way that makes their business even more profitable and even more efficient. So this is a summary slide on all the different areas where 5G technology innovation is very much ongoing and booming in 3GPP. So starting with the bread and butter of cellular ecosystem, if I want to call that, mobile broadband is still very much in the center of a lot of things we do in 3GPP standards. But at the same time, what we're trying to do is have common solutions and common mechanisms and functionalities that translates to all these different innovation areas. The second is multicast. With multicast, we're trying to apply a major learning back from LTE. With LTE, the main reason, if you ask me, the main reason multicast wasn't successful with LTE is that we made it too specialized. LTE-based multicast and BMS was very special to that particular case. It had different functionalities from the ground up, meaning already in the hardware you needed different functionalities, and then the physical layer. And it was just not a viable way to do this. We're trying to make sure the economies of scale remain with 5G. So we're not looking for specialized solutions. We're looking for one common platform, and then all the different add-ons that make it viable for a particular segment would come in software and higher layers. And this is exactly what we're now trying to do with multicast in 5G. Satellite is also a major addition to the 5G ecosystem. For decades, the cellular ecosystem and the satellite ecosystem were at odds with each other, primarily because of spectrum. But those days are now hopefully behind us, and we started to cooperate very efficiently. Essentially, the satellite ecosystem, the satellite operators and vendors came to 3GPP with the goal of utilizing 5G radio as such for satellite. And we have had already studies in the last couple of years in 3GPP, and now we reach the stage of doing normative work for satellite access using 5G, a major step forward on this. Industrial IoT, if you ask me what is perhaps the most important element of making 5G successful, is that we make 5G successful for industries, essentially for manufacturing, and all kinds of, from the car industry to agriculture, etc. To me, if we're successful in that, we were successful with 5G. So what we're trying to do with standards is to add all the different pieces and functionalities so that the different factory settings and industry users can migrate their communication means over to 5G. So whenever there was like a wired Ethernet connection between or across the assembly lines, for example, that would be replaced by 5G. You would have different autonomous vehicles running in the factory using 5G-based positioning. So essentially, industrial IoT with 5G is one of the key cornerstones of what we do in 3GPP also going forward. So just moving on some of the other functionalities we're addressing, Sidelink is something we started to address already with 4G. So that Sidelink means the direct communication between devices without the direct involvement of the network. Typical use cases here are the autonomous or autonomous driving, so the vehicular use case where cars would be communicating with each other, of course communicating also with the network, and with the combination of the two, at the end of the day, making autonomous driving available. Now we're doing this with 5G. We started to do this with 5G as well, building a whole lot more sophistication into these functionalities. With 4G, we have some basic capabilities possible with road safety, etc. But with 5G, we're building towards a full autonomous, fully safe ecosystem that not only involves cars, but also involves pedestrians and other actors of the ecosystem. Unlicensed spectrum is turning out to be a pretty important part of 5G. So typically, a cellular ecosystem builds on spectrum that is licensed by governments, but we wanted to make 5G also usable for unlicensed spectrum, so the same spectrum bands that Wi-Fi uses, for example. So it remains to be seen exactly how this would be utilized, but one typical use case could be, again, factories and industry usage. With 4G, we have already seen the explosion of variables and different kind of device types. What we see with 5G is just a multiplication of these. And we want to make sure that the network and the ecosystem optimally supports these different types of devices. So we're very much focusing on that and making that happen with release 17 and eventually with release 18. Positioning, I've already alluded to. It's very important that indoors in the factory environment, as well as outdoors for your typical commercial use cases, we don't have to rely on GPS, but we also have a native 5G cellular-based positioning system. And last but not least, extended reality. To me, if I want to point out one key functionality that would be the most notable piece of functionality for the everyday person, for the layman, would be extended reality. So with the different glasses and different kind of devices that are coming out, I just read the other day how successful the recently launched virtual reality glasses that Facebook and Qualcomm together launched. This, to me, is already showing the potential future success of this technology or phenomenon, if you want to call it that way. And again, I believe that from a commercial standpoint, this will be the marker of 5G in people's minds.
Thank you, Balázs. Now, it's also important, as you said, that we encourage and support innovation and research. How does 3GPP work and incorporate these resources? Are there any research body members of 3GPP?
So innovation and research is at the bedrock of the success of standardization. Typically, the way 3GPP is set up, much of the research and much of the innovation comes through individual member companies. Your Nokias, your Ericssons, your Qualcomms, your Apples, etc. But we also have research bodies joining 3GPP, typically from different regions, like from Korea, from Taiwan, from China, but also from the US. Not only research institutes, but also universities coming in. Typically, in terms of contribution, in terms of bringing in new innovation into standards, that still does happen mainly through the individual member companies. But it's very important that these research institutes come to 3GPP, experience how standards work is done firsthand, so they can basically adjust and direct their research so that they can bring more and more sort of useful innovation into the ecosystem.
Now, there are new factors at play in the RAN right now. For example, virtualization, open interfaces, suggestions from greenfield operators that they want more innovation, they want faster technology integration. Do you see these as challenges or opportunities for your work?
So with 5G, the horizon or the number of players that are coming into standards has grown exponentially. And exactly the greenfield operators, basically actors that have that don't have a legacy footprint. They can take 5G and basically run with it without having to adhere to a legacy footprint or having to worry about inner working. And we have already seen that these kind of players are really bringing in a lot of different innovative concepts of how you can actually build your network in the most flexible way. I mean, one thing we have learned in 3GPP that with every generation, the amount of different deployments grows exponentially. And that's not different with 5G. And this is exactly where the different open interfaces and virtualization is very, very important, because through that, you can actually support a much wider range of network deployments. So having all these open interfaces in and around the radio and the traditional base station, and then the virtualization and the cloud RAN technologies, again, makes it much easier for 5G to be adopted and deployed by greenfield operators, industries, just new segments in general. So it is a critical development in the ecosystem altogether. And we very much follow that and drive that in 3GPP.
Now, whilst there are still many grappling with the introduction and launch of 5G, there's widespread interest in what comes next, i.e. 6G, and the need to start making provisional plans now. When would you expect to see 6G type technologies make their way into the 3GPP RAN process?
So because of the speed of innovation and just the amount of enthusiasm behind expanding the cellular ecosystem, the buzzword 6G is already out there. And that's perhaps not so surprising. If we look at sort of how history has worked so far, typically a generation spans around 10 years of the ecosystem's life. So essentially what that leads me to believe that in about 10 years of where 5G has started, there would be 6G starting. Now, if I want to go with an analogy from the vehicular ecosystem, you have like a BMW, and that typically has like a mid-life cycle refresh. Typically, we do something actually similar with cellular standards. So we start with a generation. There are 1, 2, maybe 3 releases to address the immediate need, and then there is like sort of a second step. I would call it maybe 5.5G. That paves the way towards the next generation. So we do another 1, 2, maybe 3 releases under this 5.5G before we actually formally launch towards a new generation. Whether it will happen exactly this way with 5G, maybe 5.5 and 6G, that remains to be seen. But what we can already see is that the enthusiasm and sort of the momentum behind building the next generation is perhaps larger than anywhere previously in history. So maybe the 10-year life cycle will actually be a little bit quicker this time, but there's still plenty to do in 5G. So we're not running out of work or running out of concepts in the 5G space anytime soon.
Oh yes, plenty of work still to do. Thank you very much, Balázs. Very informative. We'll see you again for our panel discussion later today. Now, over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, panel discussions and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, of course, we are taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day, and you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for it to begin. Now, stay with us, please, for our next session, an interview with Anita Dola, who is CEO of NGMN. She'll be discussing the vision and future plans for the association. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Germany is Anita Dola, CEO of NGMN. Anita has more than 30 years of experience in various telecommunication fields, including 16 years with Vodafone Group and most recently at Accenture. Welcome, Anita. Thank you very much for joining us. Why don't you talk us through NGMN's vision and plans to support full 5G realization and its approach to 6G?
Thank you, Guy. So let us first look, please, on what is already achieved in the area of 5G and what additional work is needed. So the first and second phases of the 5G standardization and 3GPP are completed, and we see the first deployments on 5G across the globe, which are mainly focused on enhanced mobile broadband. But in addition, 5G can deliver additional use cases in the area of massive machine type communication and also in the area of ultra-reliable and low-latency communications. So to really unlock features like virtualization, cloudification, autonomic management, edge computing, network slicing, for achieving a flexible and scalable architecture and deliver solutions for a wide range of vertical segments, we still need to focus on a couple of things, which I will come to in the next minutes. So as NGMN, we are now focusing on emerging technologies and enablers that will fully help to deliver the 5G vision, including, of course, vertical use cases, but not only. So what additional work is required to realize 5G's full potentials, and which areas we still need to address? So one area is, of course, to realize the full benefits of virtualization, cloud, and of edge computing. We think that the adaptation of global standards enabling open interfaces and application programmable interfaces is really important here. The other area we work on is to achieve a common operator platform architecture to enable, for instance, the use of edge computing on a global scale. Another extremely important area is the increased engagement between operators and verticals for meaningful and beneficial partnerships for both sides to enable new business models. So here we also start activities, and I will explain it a bit in more detail later. And last but absolutely not least, there is an increased focus necessary to significantly improve energy efficiency, sustainability, social well-being, trust, and digital inclusion. So this is one of our focus areas in NGMN as well. So what are our plans for 5G? So our work program, which is comprising all of our partners from the industry and from academia, is focused on 5G and beyond 5G and its ecosystem. So in sync with the recommendations we already delivered with the 5G white paper 2 published in summer, we started and we have a few activities ongoing. I picked up here 3 of those activities, but of course we have much more ongoing in our program. One is the new project we just recently kicked off about green future networks. This project will actually look on 4 different areas. One area is the end-to-end footprint, and not only looking on the delivery of services and the network operation, but also really taking an end-to-end approach from the production of infrastructure and services to their disposal. The other area is the eco-design of products. The third area here is to have a deeper look into energy efficiency and means to save energy. For instance, the application of artificial intelligence for a dynamic network dimensioning, online network dimensioning. And the last point here for this project is onboard metering to really enable the control of energy consumption in a network. Another very important project is the project for Future Networks Cloud Native Platform. This project is targeting a high-level architecture for an open telco platform based on cloud-native infrastructure, embracing open interfaces, but also open source, adopting open source, and enabling, of course, also the use of edge computing. So to just highlight one part of the project. And again, last but not least, our activity in the engagement with verticals is actually focused on having the dialogue with the verticals and tackling potential gaps, solutioning of potential gaps, and achieving mutually beneficial business models and solutions. So for this, we will also reach out to our partners like 5G ACIA, but also 5G AA and alike. So here there is an overview of the general program we are running right now. Of course, most of the projects are focused on unlocking the full potential of 5G, and 3 of them I just explained a bit in more detail. So then another question is, how does the geopolitical situation impact the standardization? So here, I think the response from a standardization and pre-standardization point of view is pretty clear. So telecom standards are developed with the participation of all players, no matter where they come from. So 3GPP reflects that global partnership in a very efficient way. The 3GPP partner come from different regions representing the regional or also national standard organizations from Asia, Europe, and the United States. And they will make sure that there is no difference in network interoperability. As NGMN, we support those efforts with our published recommendations and requirements, and our partner also take those recommendations to 3GPP. I can also say that from what I see in NGMN, NGMN partners coming from different regions are working on our publications in a very trustful cooperation. And all NGMN documents must be approved by working groups and the NGMN board in consensus. So this is just a snapshot of our current global partnership in NGMN. We have almost 80 partners from the operator side, from the industry side, and from academia, and they also represent all different regions. So now the question is, how is the approach to 6G? So why is it correct to start research on 6G now? So as we know, a generation typically needs 8 to 10 years from the first design, standardization, developments, commercial availability, and deployments. We are getting faster and faster, of course. Network user, they expect the possibility to differentiate. But at the same time, they also expect reasonable costs, return of investment, to which standards and interoperability, economies of scale heavily contribute, and this takes time. In our opinion as NGMN, it is also extremely important to avoid yet another 6G technology hype. 6G will need to deliver additional value over and above of what is already possible to be delivered with 5G. In our opinion, it is extremely important in this phase now to include the user needs, societal needs, and also, of course, operational requirements. So how do we approach as NGMN 6G? So we started recently a new project focusing on 6G's vision and drivers. We start with understanding the real drivers for next generation. And for this, we will reach out to different organizations on global scale. Those organizations should represent our global society, but also user groups. Whilst our focus is still on 5G, we started a project on 6G in parallel because we believe it's important to start the work now. And there's absolutely no doubt that as NGMN, we are determined to continue to provide impactful guidance for the next generation networks, as NGMN has done this already for LTE and 5G as well. So another question is if we believe that 6G will actually be a revolution or if it will be an evolutionary path from 5G. So standardization for 6G is expected to start around 25, 26. As mentioned, we now started our work on the 6G drivers and division. When the time is due, an analysis will be performed what actually can be delivered already also with 5G, as we know 5G was anyway developed and standardized in a very flexible way. And we will check if an evolution is sufficient or if it really demands a so-called revolution. Maybe it will be a combination of both. Another extremely important factor, of course, is any technological breakthrough. Maybe there are things we don't know even today. What we can say today is that for sure artificial intelligence, deep machine learning, quantum computing, those type of technologies will play a role. And last but not least, spectrum efficiency is another key factor here. As we are now in this event addressing specifically the research, I also want to tackle the role of academia and research institutions as we see it. So what type of role does research in academia play? An extremely important role, of course. NGMN by purpose, and you have seen us in the structure of our membership, of our partnership, we include research institutions and academia. At the moment, we have 18 of such partners spanning across all of over geographical regions. So just recently now in November, as part of our NGMN forum, we had one session completely focused on 6G, where we facilitated the exchange between academia, industry, operators, and we will continue to facilitate this exchange because only by having this open dialogue, we can get out the best value for our users, for the network users, and for the ecosystem in total. In general, I believe that we will need to react agile on inputs and new developments from all different areas we just mentioned. And on top of that, add the operator view with operational aspects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita, for that presentation. Very interesting indeed. And we'll see you again later today for our panel discussion. Well, over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, discussions and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, we'll be taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day. And you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for the program to begin. Stay with us for our next session, an interview with Colin Wilcock, 5GIA Board Chairman, discussing future 6G research in Europe and the role of the 5GIA. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Germany is Colin Wilcock, 5GIA Board Chairman. Colin has 28 years of experience in telecoms and has been very active in the European research ecosystem. He's head of radio network standardization at Nokia, in addition to his role as chairman of the board of the 5G Infrastructure Association. Welcome, Colin. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Colin, can you give us an introduction to the work of 5GIA and also the success of the 5G PPP?
Yes, by all means. So maybe to start with, who are the 5GIA? What does the association do? So the 5G Infrastructure Association really tries to be a voice for European industry in all things 5G. And when we say industry, it's not just the big players, it's not just the Nokia and the Ericsson and Orange. We also have the SMEs and the academics. So we have the whole sort of ecosystem of participants within the association. And what we try and do, or one of the key things we do, is involved in 5G research. So there is a large European research program called 5G PPP, which has been leading Europe's attempts to find leadership in 5G. And this was started in 2013, 2014, has run 60 or 70 projects going right the way through from research to proof of concept, working with verticals. So trying to bring 5G technology to European industry.
Now, just because we're seeing the first 5G services doesn't mean we've stopped focusing on 5G. Let's be clear, work is still ongoing in Europe on further 5G research.
Absolutely, and it's a very good question because there is some confusion. We are beginning to see discussion and hype about 6G. And there seems to be a feeling that, well, 5G is all finished and completed and everything. And that's really not true. We're very much at the beginning of the 5G story. So we have the first systems deployed. We have the first demonstrations of using such 5G systems for some of the verticals, some of the non-telecoms domains. But there's still an awful lot of work to do. And there's still an awful lot of evolution of 5G. So the first deployments of 6G will not happen before, well, at earliest 2030. And so in the meantime, we need a technology to meet our requirements for now. And that will be 5G and the evolutions of 5G. And to enable those evolutions is one of the key things that the current 5G PPP program is actually doing. The projects in there are working with the key vertical players in automotive, in smart networks, in Industry 4.0, and trying to understand what are those requirements which those future versions of 5G need to meet, and then working together to try and find compelling services which we can create with those new features. So the 5G story is started, not finished. There is an awful lot of work to do in both research, in terms of trials, in terms of standardization, and in terms of deployment to provide full 5G to really meet the promises that were made at the beginning. This never happens overnight. It's the same with all cellular technologies. There is a first version which has the basic functionality, and then we build features on top of that as we go along, as we learn more about what is needed from the key customers.
So Colin, given, as you say, that we've still got a lot of work to do on 5G, why do we need to focus now on 6G research?
It's all to do with the time span. The cellular technologies are not something that are developed overnight. They need a very long development time. So typically we have a new cellular generation every 10 years. And if you look at that, and if you think that 5G has sort of been first deployed in 2020, then in 2030, typically we would then have that new next generation. And if you work back from that, then around now is the time to start thinking, having initial thoughts about 6G research. But this isn't about standardization. This isn't about developing products or anything like that. It's trying to understand what would be the requirements for a 6G system. What would be the key technology building blocks? And really having fundamental research, trying to understand those fundamental building blocks and what would be the best solution. So it's very, very early days. Apart from the name, we have very little in terms of 6G today. And of course, the danger, as said before, is that with all this talk and hype about 6G, we will forget about 5G. And 5G is that technology we are currently using. We need to keep on developing that in terms of research, in terms of proof of concept, in terms of deployment. And that will be the main story in terms of actually solving problems in the next 10 years. It will be 5G, not 6G.
Indeed. Sticking with the 6G concept for a moment, though, do we yet have future plans for how we go about and organize 6G research in Europe?
Yes. So one of the good things I think we can claim from Europe, and there are many detractors from Europe and saying things are not done properly at that level. But one of the success stories, in my view, is what we have done with 5G. So I talked about the 5G PPP program before, and that partnership was started early enough that it had a real impact. So this starting early with significant funding has meant that much of the fundamental research for 5G has happened in Europe. And that's been a real success, something like 800 contributions to standardization to places like 3GPP, 1,600 papers, and very much the focus of where that pre-standardization consensus has happened. And that is also the hope for 6G. So the 5GIA, together with other associations, has been in discussion with the European Commission, and we now have a proposal for a new program called Smart Networks and Services. And this Smart Networks and Services will concentrate on two things. One of them is, as we've just described, trying to continue that development and deployment of 5G. So that will be one strand. But the second strand then is to do this fundamental 6G research, build those foundations for the next generation of cellular technology.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how 5G IA may evolve as you head towards 6G, and also the SNS? How will it help to secure European leadership in the development and deployment of next generation network and technologies and services, whilst also looking and helping to accelerate European industry digitization?
Yes, in terms of the 5G IA, the point is that the smart networks and services isn't just the existing program plus plus. So it's not just exactly the same as we did in 5G, we're going to do in 6G. And the aspect here is that the scope needs to be broader. We're all aware of these different digital technologies coming together. Well, 6G is where it happens. And that means that we need to look beyond purely the telecoms. We need to consider things like AI, cloud, security, energy efficiency. There's a series of aspects there which are much broader than what we have actually done in the existing program. And that means that as the organization that will be responsible from the private side, the 5G Infrastructure Association also needs to evolve. So we need to evolve to have a broader membership. We need to make sure that we have representation from the IoT community, from the cloud community, from the verticals community as well, because clearly in 6G, verticals will also be central to the success of that technology. So moving forward, a larger community base to make sure that the opinion of the association is the opinion of European industry on 6G. In terms of the Smart Networks and Services partnership, we will be having a series of different phases. We will start with a phase where, again, we will work with the key players to develop those fundamental technology blocks. So we have projects at the end of 5GPP, the so-called ICT 52 projects, which are having a first look at beyond 5G. And hopefully they will set the roadmap, the big picture in regards to 6G. And once we have that big picture, we should then know what are these fundamental 6G technologies we need to look at. And then within the smart networks and services, those will be the first focus, trying to work on those, trying to have a collaborative environment so that we have all the big players involved, so that the results coming out of these projects will be a clear signpost towards what 6G will become and what 6G technology will be standardized.
And how closely are you working with ETSI and industry? And is there a way forward for future cooperation?
ETSI clearly is one of the most important partners for the 5G Industry Association in terms of standardization. So much of what we are doing in terms of what come the output of our projects needs to be driven into standardization. And the one of the key issues here is that many of the telecoms players, they understand standardization and 3GPP and things like this. But we're now, as we're saying, trying to expand both in 5G and certainly in 6G, the use of these cellular technologies beyond the telecoms domain and into these other areas, automotive, Industry 4.0, smart cities. And this is where knowledge of how standardization works, advice on standardization, workshops on how to actually get involved, this is where that is so vital. So we are about to sign an MOU with ETSI, which will cover the existing work in terms of 5G, but also look forward to 6G, that we can closer work together to make sure that we can better provide standardization intelligence to the partners in the project and within the association. The association is already part of the overall 3GPP. We are a industry representative organization, so we are involved in that standardization from there. And we are also a player in the Indico project, which is a project led by ETSI, trying to drive global standardization, trying to make sure that we have the same standards across the world, because that is in everyone's interest. That is one of the key value propositions of cellular technologies. Wherever I go in the world, I turn my mobile phone on, I get a signal, I'm able to talk, I'm able to use the services. And that is something clearly, certainly with the European hat on, we would not wish to see changed. And so we are investing effort trying to help bring that global standards to fruition.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Colin, and we'll be speaking with you again later today during our panel session. Over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, panel discussions and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it's all available to watch later on demand. Plus, we're taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day, and you can submit your questions now. No need to wait until the programme begins. Stay with us for our next session, an interview with Rui Aguiar, Steering Board Chairman of Networld 2020 on creating future networks. But goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Portugal is Rui Aguiar, who's Steering Board Chairman of Networld 2020. Rui is also a professor at the University of Aveiro and is an advisor to the Portuguese government on 5G policies. He has more than 500 published papers on advanced wireless networks and systems. Welcome, Rui. Thank you for joining us. Tell us more about Networld 2020 and how we can link research into a successful strategy for technology development.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this invitation and for that question, which allow me to explain to our audience what Networld 2020 is. Now, in a very simple thing, Networld 2020 is what we call an European technology platform. This means it's a body, a volunteering body, where parties interested, in this case in communications, join to discuss the future of our area and to provide contributions that they may be taken afterwards by, companies, by research projects, by the European Union for different types of actions. Now, in our reality, when I say that we are a huge organization, we are about 1,040, something like that. And this covers from the big manufacturers, from the big operators, but then also to a huge amount of innovative SMEs. For most of the academia in Europe is associated with Networld 2020, and we even have 150, something like that, organizations which are not European and are also contributing and following our work. Now, when I'm talking about our work, what do we do? Well, we basically have four major activities at this moment, four major working groups. I can start by a very recent group on vertical technology, which is communications that are oriented to the future challenges of society. We have a working group on SMEs. This working group has a very specific mandate, which is to engage SMEs in innovative ecosystems, in the research that's done across the whole Europe. And then we have two other groups, which I would say really more on the technical side. A satellite working group, which aims to bring the problems and the voice of the satellite community into the 5G, 6G community research, and the expert working group. And this expert working group is where we actually deal with the key technical challenges that we see that may be in front of us, not only in Europe, but across the whole world. And actually this explanation is required given the scope of this theme, research to standards, how to boost that. Well, we do have a sort of mental framework. So you do have, the vision and strategy and beginning, as you see in the picture. Then you move to the kind of, concept exploration. So from that very visionary things, you start to figure out what may or may not seem reasonable to develop. Then from that, you launch all your technology development, right? That technology development starts by, very early proof of concepts, and you are then maturing it, progressing it until you start binding it with the standard definition. Now, currently, with the changes that we have, all leads to a sort of changes in terms of the ecosystem. So there is an ecosystem restructuring happening at the same time. Until, finally you reach, the standards and the market. Now, in this whole, process flow, there are several parts where Network 2020 can actually help. So in terms of the very early parts, we have a document called Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, which actually aims to set up the identification of the key technologies. Now, that document is then, from our point of view, consumed. We produce that document and we deliver it both to the European Union, both to the standardization bodies, both to the research project, in order to aid them to identify how they should progress on their own mandate along what we see as very long innovation lines, very long-term innovation lines. We also proceed in other aspects. For instance, we do look into this SME stuff in terms of the ecosystem reconfiguration. We try to bring new SMEs, innovative SMEs, into this big world, and to facilitate their interaction with big players, providing disruptive solutions. We also try to provide some linkage with the groups that are considering the development of standards, and we try to coordinate with them in such a way to at least highlight what could be the potential for standards. And then, of course, it moves into the standards and with companies and the IPR of the companies, and then hopefully as the standards get a reality and leads to new technologies that the end user can actually explore. So we are trying to facilitate and boost this process from research to standards in different points. But I would say, as a summary, that the key differentiating factor is that we are really presenting a document which highlights most challenging and technically interesting areas for the future.
Well, thank you for that overview. What technical developments and what technical contributions is Network 2020 making?
Well, this is a question that I never like to answer. Now, let me try to give an idea about what we are talking about. So this Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, it's a document that we try to revive or update every 2 to 3 years. Unfortunately, with the pressures in the last years, it's really every 2 years. But the development of this document, from the moment we start until we finish it, it's about 10 months. It's a huge amount of effort. The last document actually had about 150 contributors in the end when it was closed, coming from 90-something organizations, different organizations. So we are talking about a huge community effort. I can't really quantify it in terms of the manpower that's spent, but we are talking about many dozens of manpower which are collectively spent from the community in this document. And then, unsurprisingly, we are talking about something with 220 pages on that order of magnitude. So trying to actually pinpoint the detailed technologies that are there addressed, it's very hard. But what I can tell you, and I invite all the audience to actually download the document, which is publicly available. This is a result of a public process with community contributions. So we sort of identified a couple of, I would say, traditional areas and not so traditional areas which are relevant for the future of communications in Europe. And of course, on the traditional areas, I can say that radio technology and associated signal processing is common. I can also tell you that optical communications that people don't usually associate, or many people don't associate to mobile communications, but it's an essential part of the core of the network, or even satellite technologies, which I mentioned. I would say these are very traditional, very focused areas. And of course, we also have global system architecture and global network design, which are, I would say, traditional areas from the most fundamental communication research. But then we are now in a different world. Now, in that different world, there are two things that we cannot avoid. One thing is, security, both network and service security. We cannot avoid the security challenges that these interconnected societies bring to us. And we cannot also avoid the challenges of developing new services, and new services that have to follow, at least in Europe, our society guidance. They have to follow, the GDPR. They have to follow human rights. They have to follow ethical AI considerations. So all these are areas which we cannot avoid, and we should start to consider them as also becoming traditional. Now, two other things that we also did and identified was the strong dependence on components, devices and components. Now, the challenge that we are seeing, both on the optical domain, both on the radio domain, and even in terms of the sheer amount of bit rate of information that we are expecting to process, are pushing and presenting a wide set of challenges for the semiconductor, for the device and materials industry. So we also were recognizing the kind of challenge that we have there. And finally, it's, probably not surprising, we do also address the concepts of emerging technologies and challenging trends. For instance, one of my favorites is something called mobile the air network. The fact that we are going to have, flying networks around us, we'll be able to have connectivity, even if you are, for instance, in a plane, or we'll have the connectivity required for guiding all the drones around us that we can imagine. So all of these areas have been actually the focus of a specific chapter in that document. In some cases, like the system architecture, we actually broke that in two parts because we divided a part of that chapter, creating another one, dedicated explicitly to the current challenges in terms of edge, how we are moving to the edge and how can we integrate increasing intelligence in the edge in the overall network design. So, as I said, all these corresponded to 20, 30 pages of discussion about interesting topics that we will have in the future. And we identify those topics further in terms of these are topics that we can do with some effort now. We can progress research and reach that. And then also topics that we identify that this is really far away. We need to start on the fundamentals now and progress if we want to reach this in a 5, 7, 8 years time frame.
Now, the diagram you presented that takes us from research through to standards, it's very clear that there's a lot of actors involved in this. Even just when we look at Europe, there's a lot of actors in the whole process. Are they all aware of the need to coordinate, align, and create this sort of cohesive vision and roadmap, if you like, to take research through to standards?
Well, I would say that this event is a demonstration that we are all aware of the challenge. And I would say that the good thing about this event that ETSI has pushed is that it brought a couple of those actors at the same time together. And what that diagram represents, it's probably not, the final vision on what we can do, but I would say it's very much a potential vision about how we naturally are gravitating ourselves. Because these people that we have here, we all know each other. We all know what we've been doing. And I think there is a very good spirit of cooperation in Europe at this moment. We understand the challenges. I think maybe we should say that we are afraid. We understand that the communications world that was so easy to sort of assess 20 years ago, now we find ourselves in a communications world which is actually essential for the functioning of our society. And this is a huge responsibility. And I think we all share that vision, we all share that responsibility. And as such, we are trying to find out how we can, leverage on the work of each other, contribute to the work of each other in order of maximize the overall effort that all of us are doing.
Final question to you. Do you have any advice for the standards community in terms of how they act with the research community? For example, are there any different cultural issues that they need to be aware of?
Okay, so this is a very good question. And I think I'm now going to be not politically correct, because there is a very fundamental challenge. And it's related with what's the objective. Now, as an academic, my drive is to publish. I try to publish as fast as possible. On the other hand, the same approach to innovation from the part of the companies, it usually goes back through the need to retain IPR on that innovation, which means that they don't publish as fast as possible. They actually first try to reserve that IPR. Now, this is here a culture clash. I mean, we've all been living on that in all the joint projects that industry and academia does. But then in the end, does reflect on standardization, because you don't push anything to standardization until you are, reasonably safe in terms of your IPR rights. So how can we make sure that we bring academics in a world where, or let's say not necessarily academics, but at least people which are more interested in the research up front? Maybe it's disruptive, maybe because they are SMEs that don't have the ability to go to the IPR wars, for instance. But how do you bring those innovative things into an environment where a large part of the elements are very concerned on the IPR? Yes, in the end, they may concede the IPR for fair usage. But there is a period on this process where the situation is, I would say, not very clear for this tussle between reclaiming IPR and being disruptive and bringing new things to the world as fast as possible. I really don't know how to solve this problem. I think it's a challenge that we have. It's an economical and market challenge that we need to solve. And standardization somewhat suffers from this.
Well, thank you very much, Rui. It's certainly an important issue and one that we do need to give a lot more consideration to. Now, we'll be speaking with you again later today during our panel session, but thank you for now. Over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, panels and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Stay with us for our next session, an interview with Markus Mürk, Vice Chairman of the ETSI Board, who will be discussing ETSI as a platform for research and innovation. Goodbye for now. Good morning and welcome to the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. I'm Guy Daniels, and joining me now from Germany is Markus Mürk, Vice Chairman of the ETSI Board. Markus is a Principal Engineer with Intel Deutschland and also a member of the Board of the 5G Automotive Association. Welcome, Markus. Thank you very much for joining us. Let us talk about research and innovation in ETSI. Is this an important area for ETSI as we move forward?
Definitely, and thank you very much for the question. So ETSI is really at the forefront of technology. And as such, research and innovation is the lifeblood of our work, so to say. It is therefore really in ETSI's interest to have close ties and interaction with the research and innovation community in order to ensure that new technology is continuously fed into our organization and will finally translate into state-of-the-art products that go to the next stage and do the next step towards the next level of technology.
Well, let me take the perspective of a researcher. What do I need to do to bring my work into ETSI?
Excellent question. So we have obviously anticipated that kind of question and have collected a number of tools in order to support researchers and research organizations. In particular, ETSI has created an 8-points plan which guides researchers in a step-by-step approach from the technical work to influencing standards. And in principle, this works very, very easily. The first step is that you should be aware of the type of technology you would want to bring into ETSI. Then you get in touch with the ETSI Secretariat, and here you see an email address that can be used for that. And then finally, you will be guided by ETSI towards the right technical body, or ETSI will even help you to create a new technical body. And in the last stage, you will need to set up a work item. And that, again, is quite simple and straightforward. You need the support of 4 ETSI members in total. And having this support, off you go. The work is on and active.
So the process looks clear and simple, but before starting any new work, would it make sense for me as a researcher to engage with ETSI to first discuss ideas and opportunities?
Yes, definitely. And again, very good question. So I think as we just saw, the first port of call would really be to get in touch with the Secretariat. Another possibility is to have a closer look at further material that is available on the ETSI portal. And here I would like really to guide you to the webpage www.etsi.org/research, where a number of leaflets, general information, the 8-points plan we just saw, etc., are made available. In a second step, I would recommend to look at the ETSI events portal. ETSI has regular events which gathers a huge number of standards experts, industry in general, and also researchers and innovators. And this is a great framework, actually, to get in touch with the community, to get to know like-minded people, to get to know where to find support, in particular to find these 4 supporting members I was just mentioning. And and once you are inside the community, I believe it will be quite simple and straightforward to get your work started.
Right, I'm going to leave my researcher persona for now because I was never the best undergraduate physicist. Are there any examples of new technologies that are under consideration for future work by ETSI?
Brilliant question again. Thank you very much. So ETSI has indeed been reaching out to research organizations in order to get a better understanding on where we are with respect to new upcoming technologies. One brilliant example is our recent exchange with the Networld 2020 European Technology Platform. Networld 2020 has indeed identified around about 100 technology directions as we move forward over the next couple of years. ETSI has been taken up these technology directions and has been mapping those to ETSI's technical bodies. So as a result, we have a quite comprehensive overview on which of these technology directions would fit into the scope of which technical committee or industry specification group. So this could be a great basis for newcomers and researchers and innovators in general in order to identify the specific topics they are interested in, have a hint and pointer to the right technical committee and the right chairman. And I am absolutely certain that the chairman, as well as the ETSI Secretariat, would be available to help you in getting in touch with the related organization and to get your work fed into an upcoming standard.
And Marcus, from what you've just said, it's very clear that ETSI cares about and values researchers and innovators. Do you have any examples of how such relationships have already proved successful?
Yes, I definitely have. And let me explain a bit of background information to you. A couple of years ago, the European Commission had funded some highly successful research programs which were called E2R and eCube. So these were about end-to-end reconfigurability and end-to-end efficiency. And these projects have actually developed the basis for work that has finally been fed into ETSI. And here, let me just take the opportunity to give a wave of hands to my former colleague Didier Bourse, who has been passionately driving these research programs. And as an outcome, ETSI has finally decided to create a technical committee, which was called RRS, so Reconfigurable Radio Systems. This committee was building on the work by E2R and eCube, and was further developing and driving the technology with support of key industrial stakeholders. So at this point in time, some success stories of this committee include the definition of the European flavor of spectrum sharing, which is called LSA, so Licensed Shared Access, or ELSA, Evolved Licensed Shared Access. This is a flavor we are currently working on. And moreover, RRS is currently supporting ETSI's role in the European Commission expert group on the Radio Equipment Directive, so the RED. And here we are indeed going to further evolve some of the RED articles that are required for product market introduction in Europe. And RRS is in particular involved in solutions that relate to the combination of software and hardware. So again, very relevant work which is supporting the European Commission in implementing new policy frameworks in the context of the RED.
All very encouraging indeed. And any final advice for our audience, Marcus? What's your parting message for researchers?
Very well. So I believe the message to give is that ETSI's doors are wide open to researchers and research organizations and, innovators in general. Please come and see us. Please talk to us. And we will be very willing to help you get your work into ETSI, into the right committees. And we are very much looking forward to meeting you in ETSI.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And we'll be speaking with you again in just a moment during our panel session. Now, over the next 2 days, we have a full agenda of presentations, panels and interviews. Details and timings are on the website. And if you miss anything, don't worry, it will all be available to watch later on demand. Plus, we will be taking your questions during a live Q&A session at the end of each day, and you can submit your questions now. No need to wait for that program to begin. So stay with us for our next session, a panel discussion featuring today's speakers, which will address the research, innovation and standards ecosystem in ETSI. Goodbye for now. You're watching the ETSI Virtual Event on boosting the impact of research and innovation through standardization. It's time now for our panel discussion on the research, innovation and standards ecosystem in ETSI, where we welcome back today's speakers and presenters. And if you want to ask any of our panelists a question, then please do so now. Use the form here on the website to submit your question. Now, as we continue to develop 5G, we are also looking ahead at what comes next. And whilst there is undoubtedly an opportunity for Europe, there's also a risk of being left behind. So how do we move forward? What role will ETSI play? And what is needed for Europe to take a leading position on research and innovation beyond 5G? Well, let's introduce our panelists. Markus Mürk, Vice Chairman of the ETSI Board, joins us from Germany. Piers O'Donoghue, Director, Future Networks Director at DG Connect with the European Commission, joins us from Brussels. Balázs Betenyi, 3GPP TSG RAN Chairman, joins us from Hungary. Rui Aguiar, Steering Board Chairman Networld 2020, joins us from Portugal. Anita Dola, CEO of NGMN, joins us from Germany. And Colin Wilcock, 5GIA Board Chairman, also joins us from Germany. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for taking part in our discussion today. I've got an opening question I'd like to ask each of you, and that is, what is the sense of urgency of research for 6G, and how can we learn from what was done with 5G and possibly do it better? Markus, perhaps I could start by asking you that.
Yeah, definitely, Guy. So I think what we are seeing in the research landscape is a plethora of research results that are becoming available and which will play an important role, undoubtedly will play an important role in beyond 5G and 6G system design. So what's really important for us is to build on the available momentum and take researchers by their hands, drive the corresponding technologies into standards, and make society take advantage of the corresponding benefits. That's actually the key point for us, and that's where ETSI has to play a key role.
Thank you, Markus. And Piers, I'll ask you the same thing. Why the sense of urgency?
Well, just as we're moving into the stage of implementation of standalone 5G, there's no doubt that the acceleration of 6G research is very much in our sights. And our main competitors have all launched important 6G research and innovation initiatives. Korea is the last one to make an announcement, but also we have Japan, we have had China announcing initiative last year. And of course, there are significant moves in the United States as well. So it's not too early at all. And it is urgent because this is part of the strategy which we see for Europe in terms of technology independence and also sovereignty. We want and we think that Europe can be in the lead on these connectivity technologies as 5G is implemented, as the race towards a whole new ecosystem of communications technologies and data services develops. We really see that it is essential that Europe be at the cutting edge. So while we still have to convince some people about 5G, the researchers who are listening to us now, the technologists who understand how long it takes to get this up and running will realize that 6G has to start now.
Thank you, Piers. And Balázs, we've heard we need to start thinking about research for 6G now. Can we learn from what we've done with 5G and possibly even do things better?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've seen with 5G is that the take-up in deployments have vastly accelerated what we have seen back in 4G. So just extrapolating that, what we could expect in the next 4, 6, 8 years, I think the demand towards 6G type research and 6G research making it into early standardization and eventually mainstream standardization is going to happen faster than it has happened with 5G. So I think one thing that we could learn from 5G is do not underestimate neither the speed nor the vastness of possibilities that are out there with the next generation research.
Thank you. And Rui, I'm going to ask you the same question. What is this sense of urgency we're seeing for 6G, and how can we learn from the process we've undertaken with 5G?
It's actually a very interesting question that I've been reflecting while I'm hearing the other questions. Well, there are two aspects that we need to be quite clear on. First, that we don't know what 6G is or will be at this moment. What we know is that the increase of traffic on networks always reach a point where it's worthwhile to do a disruptive investment in CapEx in order to be able to achieve and to follow up the increasing traffic as time goes by. Now, this is a trend we've verified across all these years, which led to this sort of 10-year time frame, because it has to do with the way the traffic increases, the requirements from society increases, and the cost of doing a major network upgrade. Now, as I've heard, yes, what we are realizing at this moment is that the systems get more and more complex. So the amount of reflection that we need on the technology and their evolution and interoperation gets more and more hard to do. While at the same time, we are having an increasing, almost exponential pressure for new traffic, new applications, increasingly digitalized societies. So on one hand, we are having the pressure of everything is being faster. On the other hand, we are having the pressure of our systems are becoming more and more complex. So innovating on this and preparing for the next step in quality terms, not only on quantity, is something, and it's a task that is becoming more and more challenging. So yes, I would say that if we want to keep the kind of timings that we've seen in the past, we need to step up our game on 6G.
Thank you, Rui. And Anita, what's your view of this sense of urgency around research for 6G, and what can we learn from what we've been doing in the past 10 years with 5G research?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I can only echo what also Rui already said and my co-speakers. So we have this typical 8 to 10 year cycle, and this is why it's not too early to start to work on 6G and to perform research on 6G. What we can learn to do better from the past is, so we strongly believe, as you know, I'm representing here the global NGMN Alliance. We strongly believe that we really need to gather societal requirements. So we need to be better in getting the user requirements into all this new development of our own 5G and 6G, however we call it. And so we will also learn from what is happening now with the 5G deployments. We will have this in parallel for some time. We will learn from the currently happening 5G standalone deployments. 5G can already cover a lot of use cases, so we need to really evaluate how can 6G add additional value to 5G. And I think that that's the main message. So for us, it's really important to include societal requirements, user requirements, and of course also operational requirements. Yeah.
Thank you, Anita. And finally, Colin, why the interest and sense of urgency in 6G research, and what can we do, if anything, better than we've done previously?
Well, I feel that the other panelists have already answered why, that we have this periodicity in cellular communication technologies, and now we're at the stage where if you look at new 6G systems being deployed in 2030 or 2030 plus, now is the time we need to start the research, not the standardization, but the research in those fundamental building blocks. In terms of what can we learn, from my point of view, if I look at what Europe has achieved in 5G with the existing research program, the 5G PPP, to my mind, the thing to learn from that is clear, that what we need investment, public investment early and substantially to make sure that we have those resources to develop a lot of those key technologies in Europe. And I think if we look at the existing 5G PPP program, we can see that as a real success for Europe, where we've developed many of the key technologies that we currently think of as 5G. We have proved them with the key vertical domains, automotive, smart networks, Industry 4.0. We've had 800 contributions to standardization, thousands of contributions to scientific papers. We've actually created a lot of what we currently think of as 5G in that European partnership. And clearly what we would like to do is we would like to see the same with 6G. And we are already in discussions with the European Commission. There are already plans looking forward to 6G, the so-called Smart Networks and Services proposal. And that is what we need. We need this partnership between the public side, the industry, and the public side, the European Commission and the member states, the private side, which is the industry, and working together then be a force for creating 6G technology in Europe.
Thank you, Colin. And Piers, keeping the focus on Europe for the moment, is it realistic that Europe can take the lead on 6G research and then standards? What is the unique value of Europe?
Well, I think it's that we bring together a number of different national research ecosystems and a lot of small companies, as well as a couple of very large ones who are working together. We should really take the lessons from the past, is that with what Colin has just referred to, which is the 5G PPP, we have a good model of how industry steps up to the plate and plays a key role in working together on research and innovation, but also, of course, then standardization as the technology develops. And that's something which realistically we can anticipate that Europe will again be able to play a key role. Now, we're not pretending that we're going to be leaders on our own. We're not pretending that this will be made in Europe on its own. But what we are definitely certain is that we cannot afford to allow others to develop and implement the technologies for us, and that Europe just becomes a consumer of the 6G ecosystem that will evolve. We have, as Colin has said, already planned at an advanced stage for a new partnership, a new form of partnership. Because as we've seen now, whether it's with COVID or over a longer term, the security issues arising from 5G, we have to consider the strategic and the security elements of these communications networks, just as we did with the 5G cyber toolbox. So for the next partnership, we will also be involving the member states. We'll be using a new entity called a joint undertaking. Now, it's critical to say that industry will still be in the lead, but as the member states will be responsible for the security elements of these networks, but also will actually have to provide earlier and more investment to roll out the networks and to provide the infrastructures for test beds and for testing the technologies. That's something where the member states have to be involved. But if we do all there come together, the Commission, the member states and industry, as well as academia and of course the standardization bodies, then yes, Europe can and realistically will play a key role.
Thank you, Piers. Research leads in eventually into standards. Balazs, 3GPP is contribution driven. There's a huge amount of momentum behind 3GPP, but cellular standards is a very, very complex process and massive undertaking. What can be done to make it simpler for researchers to understand and engage with and get their research results into 3GPP?
That is an excellent question. Most of the contributions we see in 3GPP and standards over the last 2 decades really come from the industry. But then again, the industry by that time would have participated in all these research efforts that Colin was outlining, for example. So you typically get the research results channeled into standards through industry players. But then again, most of the major research organizations from all over the globe, they do directly participate in 3GPP meetings more and more because it helps them understand both the process as well as the needs from all the different segments. By now, 3GPP has really gathered key players from all the different industries that are planning to use 5G, take advantage of 5G technology, and having that direct connection within the 3GPP ecosystem between researchers and all these segments, of course, the cellular ecosystem, is the bedrock of progress and making the right decisions going forward.
Thank you, Balázs. And Marcus, you'd like to come in on this question?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. We have seen in ETSI that researchers indeed are interested in bringing the technology to standards, because finally that is the key tool that allows technology to be brought to industry, to be introduced into future products, and then to be made available to the society as a whole, of course. But what we have also seen, as you mentioned, is that organizations that have not been active in this space might find it difficult to take the first steps and to really get involved. So from the ETSI side, we have addressed this problem. We have been creating a number of tools that are available freely on the ETSI web portal under the research folder. So I would like to invite everybody to have a look at that. And then furthermore, the ETSI Secretariat has set up a hotline and email address that can be used by everybody in order to have a first port of call, so to say. So it enables researchers to get direct contact to standards experts, to secretariat experts who can provide support and guide researchers to take the first steps successfully.
Thank you, Marcus. Anita, network operators, the core of your membership at NGMN, are busy deploying commercial 5G networks across the globe commercially now. So is it too soon to start talking publicly about 6G? Are we going to risk losing customer trust?
Yeah, it's an ongoing discussion, of course, in the entire community. And I think there is a very clear answer on this, that as you already pointed out, the new generation or whatever is innovation always happens in parallel. So our users, so our end users, they expect, of course, means to differentiate and to innovate, but they also expect a reasonable, affordable cost basis and return of investments at the end. So, and economies of scale, which can be achieved through interoperability and standardization, it just takes time. So this is why I strongly believe it is correct to start the research on 6G now, so that we can really achieve the best outcome for our network users. And also to be very clear here, 5G is still absolutely in focus of the operator community, and there is absolutely no doubt that this will be one of the major focus themes also here in NGMN in our work program. And the first work on 6G starts in parallel. And also, I mean, what I would like to mention is that from industry representatives from our network users, I already received questions about 6G. So I think that our end users also expect us to work in parallel on innovation.
Thank you. And Colin, as Anita said, work is still continuing. There's a lot of work continuing on 5G. What about 5G PP? You know, it's been very successful. How is 5G PP going to evolve as we move towards 6G? Is it something as simple as a name change, or is it getting more profound than just this 5G, 6G?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the issue is that the 5G PPP is the program. I represent the association, the 5GIA, which is running that program together with the European Commission. The actual program has now had its final call. So the final set of projects has been approved and will start early next year. And some of those projects are indeed already looking at beyond 5G, setting the first ideas of what 6G will be. But as we move forward, as we consider 6G in detail, this will not be part of 5G PPP, this will be part of this Smart Networks and Services project, this is not project, partnership that we're talking about, program, a series of projects. And that needs to be something different to 5G PPP. It's not just 5G PP plus. And the reason is that the scope needs to be a lot wider. We're all aware that digital technology is coming together. And one of the things that will differentiate 6G is bringing in things like AI and cloud into the sort of telecoms area in a more integrated way. But we also need to consider other areas. So we also need to consider things like IoT, which tends to be considered a bit separate today. And we need all of these communities to be involved. So what we need to do is we need to have much broader participation in these partnerships, which means we need a broader community involved. And that is the main change going forward, having not just the telecoms world, but having the other vertical domains, as in automotive, as in smart cities, as in Industry 4.0, but the other technological areas such as cloud and IoT also closely involved.
Thank you, Colin. Rui, let me come back to you. Several groups are working on research agendas for beyond 5G in Europe. How do you propose we bring all these activities together to increase their impact?
Okay, so once again, a very good question. It is, when we talk about pure research, frankly, as an academic, I've already seen lots of papers claiming that they were working in 6G. Nobody knows exactly what that means, but at least it shows that there is a community that's already interested in looking to the future of networks. Now, research is done by cooperation, by talking, and I would say we almost explore the best ideas from each other in order to bring something else. And this happens inside, the academic groups, the industrial groups, inside a country, inside a continent, across associations. So in one hand, we do really need to have a huge community, and taking the words of Colin, a community that increasingly requires a different set of competences, which brings added type of challenges, how to make these communities talk to each other. Now, what we do aim to do is to actually address these multiple groups and engage them with sort of common views. We do have a huge document which is called Strategic Research Innovation Agenda, where we identify key topics that need to be addressed for the future of beyond 5G and for 6G networks. Now, we do expect that people, with a couple of events that we will also organize, will sort of gravitate and organize themselves on this common ambition of building the future. And in fact, I think that it's not a matter of following the others. I mean, there is no problem if we cooperate with North America, Korea, Japan, China, Brazil, whoever. It's not really an issue, because I think that in Europe we do have critical mass with a critical advantage. We strongly believe that 6G will be, grounded on societal needs. And I think we can probably say that in Europe, human values, the citizen itself and the society power is the strongest in the world. So trying to design a network that will cater to these kind of requirements, it will need the contributions of all these persons, but in Europe, I think we are in a huge advantage against everybody else.
Thank you for that, Rui. Marcus, ETSI's clearly ready when it comes to welcoming research, but what more needs to be done to promote that platform? Is it a simple case of build it and they will come?
Well, it's definitely not the case that people from other communities are simply coming to us. I mean, it is very clear that we need to promote this platform, as you say. I mean, what we are doing, for example, is, as Rui explained, we are taking advantage of activities in the research community. Rui was, for example, speaking about the strategic research and innovation agenda of the Networld 2020 European technology platform. So what we did from the ETSI side is to reach out to Networld 2020, take the findings of this SRIA, in particular the identification of about 100 technology directions which are expected to become relevant over the next few years. And we have been mapping those onto the various technical bodies in ETSI. So here we have created a tool that is able to direct researchers immediately to the right target organization within ETSI. And this is just one example. So indeed, we are reaching out to research organizations. We are collaborating, and we are trying to guide our friends from the innovation and research community towards ETSI. But of course, this is also a call for letting us know what else we can do, right? I mean, we had a lucky situation that Rui kindly helped us getting access to his community, but possibly there are communities we are not aware of. There are communities that are doing relevant work that may be able to benefit ETSI, that may be able to be driven into industry and products. So please let us know, talk to us. And again, please let me refer to the ETSI portal and the research information database that is available there. Talk to us, let us know, and we would be happy to get in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. Well, a final question for now to all of you. The scene is set, the players have announced their plans, everything's in place, but what more can be done to reduce overlap, to converge efforts and accelerate research into standards and the market? Balázs, would you like to start things off?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? I think it also comes down to where would you actually draw the line? I mean, the way I would see it is the continued innovation is, of course, crucial, whether some of it will still be 5G or some of it we will eventually call 6G. I think that decision will fall somewhere years from now. I mean, I'm a pragmatist, so where I draw the line between generations is the backwards compatibility of the radio technology. So whenever the requirements that are fulfilled with the radio technology that is not anymore backwards compatible with the previous generation, that's when we have a new G. But the line is not black and white. Even now between 4G and 5G, several new functionalities were actually placed into both of these generations. So how and when we would actually get to 6G per se, I'm not sure that is actually the critical question. For me, the critical question is how we keep up the speed of innovation and successfully bring it into standards. And I think for that, the multilateral global cooperation going forward is absolutely key.
Great. And Anita, as Balázs says, how do we ensure this pace of research continues? How do we accelerate that even? Any ideas of what we can do to prevent duplication of work?
Yeah, first of all, I think we need to have a very open-minded exchange, and we need to also be flexible with regards to our own working modes, and probably also adopt the global standard setting to emerging industry needs, including topics like open source. So in NGMN, as you know, so we are an operator-driven organization, but we also have in our partnership in NGMN research organizations, and we do this by purpose and to facilitate this exchange. For Europe, I believe what one of the differences we have in Europe. We have, compared to other regions of the world, quite a high number of operators, and we have a great possibility to combine the research also with a very high user centricity, because we should have enough user insights and a good field for differentiation and innovation.
Thank you. And Colin, how can we converge our efforts? How can we accelerate the research process?
Well, clearly, from my point of view, the first step is certainly trying to get this European partnership off the ground. Hopefully, this will start halfway through next year. And the point is, we need some central point for discussion, for trying to come to some sort of consensus. There are clearly many, many activities spread across the globe, as we have heard, but we need somewhere where many of the key players can come together in a fairly neutral environment and actually come to some consensus about what are going to be the major functionalities and building blocks. And due to the open nature of Europe, I believe that Europe is the perfect place for that to happen, and I hope the smart networks and services will provide the platform to enable that key players can come together and decide what 6G will be.
Thank you. And Rui, what more can we do to coordinate our work and accelerate research to get it into the standards process and then get it to market?
Well, I'll probably be slightly off key here, because I think that depends on what stage of our work that we are talking. Now, I think it was clear on previous discussions that we are, I would say, on the very early work for 6G. And here, I would say that I don't expect any consensus. What I would expect would be a huge amount of investment in a huge amount of different ideas, and some of them will be successful, and some of them will no. And so there is a stage that I think that's where we are, where hearing and engaging in discussions of very different views will be essential. Now, after that, we can move into a more research moving really to standardization phase. And then we start to have the need for consensus. Then we need to start to have a global trend in Europe and hopefully also across other continents, by the reasons that Colin mentioned, where we can start aligning the technologies, the people that are really going to put the nuts and bolts on the standards to converge along very similar lines. On an early stage, I think that what we need is a huge amount of conversation, not focusing on the alignment, but focusing on being creative, bringing new ideas, bringing new requirements, trying to get such a complete view of what could be our future challenges as possible. If we do that phase properly, then I think it will be much easier for people to align. And we can really move then fast into standardization.
Thank you. And Marcus, any further thoughts about what we can do to converge our efforts and to avoid duplication of work?
Yeah, definitely. And please let me follow up on the statements by Rui. Actually, a very good question is, at which point in time should we engage with the standards community and work towards some consensus finding in the industry? Actually, I think there is the general belief that we should probably only go to standards when a technology is stable, and the so-called final stage or stage rework of the technology can be defined in a standard setting organization. I would caution and say that at this stage, work in standards is probably already going on, and you will probably see that as a researcher, you're coming too late into the standards community. Let me give an example, a specific example. One of the technologies that is certainly going to be relevant for beyond 5G and 6G systems is, for example, terahertz technology. right? So should we wait until research is stable and can propose a specific terahertz implementation to standard setting organization? I don't believe that this is required. I mean, we can start at an earlier stage. For example, it is definitely valuable to get researchers together and think, for example, in an early stage, for example, about propagation models is a great start, right? Discuss the physical properties, have some consensus on the technological basis that should be used to develop this technology. So there are different stages, and I would really encourage the research community to get in touch with standard setting organizations such as ETSI in an early stage, in order not to miss the train and to be as impactful as you can be.
Thank you. And Piers, final thoughts and comments from yourself about how we can accelerate research into standards and then into the market?
Yes, well, starting from now, I think in your original question, you used the word overlap. There will be some sort of seamless transition from 5G into 6G, which is natural. And we've just seen the way that the 3GPP has worked in the past when we have different evolutions and different releases. But so that we don't keep doing the same thing, so that we do accelerate, and particularly that Europe accelerates, we have to have a vision. And that ties in with what Rui was saying about us being at a very early stage of 6G. Because if we just think back, 5G started from a vision. We all remember the ITU vision document, the move from IMT 2020 to M 2030. Several industrial groups, including the industry in the 5G IA, the 5G PPP, NGMN, etc., produced their own vision documents, and they were very useful to drive forward future standards. So for 6G, we still have to develop that collective vision, and we have to do it quickly. It's happened in a few member states. Our colleagues in Finland, for example, have already been working on a 6G flagship. But the element that I want to introduce, might surprise some experts in standardization, is that vision has to be, first of all, a high-level vision. And what is it that makes Europe different? And it goes back to what Anita said at the start, some of the other elements that we have to bring in. Social values, for example, but in very concrete ways. We have data protection, and that means data protection by design. We have security by design. And the third element, which nobody's mentioned so far, but which will be crucial to 6G, both as a technology, as it operates, but also what it does, that is climate neutrality, low power technology, and helping us to meet our very ambitious climate goals. It's something which no technology can fail to take account of, and we hope that 6G will be very helpful in that regard. But those are critical issues where I would dare say that Europe will be in the lead. In some cases, people will say, those guys, once again, they're imposing extra cost on themselves so they won't actually succeed in the race. Well, Europe has shown that we are prepared to pay that extra cost in order to get those protections, in order to get that value out of the technology. And in the long run, it's showing to be a winning strategy. So the industrial actors who are engaging now in the SNS partnership, they've already developed a roadmap. We've heard about it. And when we start those 60 projects, we will hope to be at a stage where we are actually clear on what is our vision, and then what is the technology, what are the technology challenges. We're already working on very early drafts based on the research agenda developed by industry that's been referred to. What might be in early work programs, but it's the industry association and it is the joint undertaking that will actually decide those work programs. But whether it's on terahertz communications, whether there are other elements to do with security, particularly with regard to network security and edge computing security, all of those things will come out soon. But we will quickly see what it is in terms of technology that differentiates 5G from 6G and what it is that we need to do to accelerate to get to the point where we want to be in a few years' time.
Well, thank you very much, Piers. And indeed, thank you, everyone. We're going to stop our discussion here, but not for long, as we'll be returning shortly to answer live questions from our audience. And based on this last session alone, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions. This is your opportunity to question our speakers. If you haven't already done so, then please use the form on the website to submit your questions now. We'll get through as many of them as we can. So please stay with us, and we'll be back with a live Q&A session in just a moment. Goodbye for now.